in my chest, and I could feel Claire trembling beside me. Ms. Harper stood frozen, her eyes locked on Kane, her expression unreadable. "You've been busy," Kane said, his voice low and mocking. "But you should have known better than to think you could outsmart me." I took a step forward, my hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "Kane, listen, this doesn't have to end badly. We can talk about this." He laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Talk? You think I'm here to talk? You've caused a lot of trouble, Carter. And now it's time to clean up the mess." Claire's voice was barely a whisper. "What do you want?" Kane's eyes flicked to her, his smile widening. "What do I want? I want you to stop meddling. I want you to hand over everything you've got, every document, every piece of evidence. And then maybe I'll let you walk away." Ms. Harper stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "You're bluffing. You can't kill us. Too many people know what's going on. If we disappear, it'll only make things worse for you." Kane's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Maybe. But I don't have to kill you. There are other ways to make people disappear." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me, but I couldn't let it paralyze me. We had to do something, anything to get out of this. "All right," I said, my voice shaking. "We'll give you what you want. Just put the gun down." Kane's eyes narrowed. "I'm not stupid, Carter. You'll give me the evidence first. Then we'll talk." I glanced at Ms. Harper, who gave a barely perceptible nod. We didn't have a choice. Not with a gun pointed at us. "It's in the car," I said, gesturing toward the door. "I'll go get it." Kane shook his head. "No, you stay here. She'll get it." He pointed the gun at Claire, who flinched but didn't move. Ms. Harper stepped forward. "I'll go. Claire stays." Kane considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Fine. But no funny business. If you try anything, I'll shoot her first." Ms. Harper's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. She moved toward the door, her steps slow and deliberate. Kane kept the gun trained on Claire and me, his eyes flicking between us and Ms. Harper as she disappeared outside. The silence in the cabin was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and frantic, and the sound of Claire's shallow breathing beside me. Kane's eyes never left us, his expression cold and unreadable. "You should have stayed out of this, Carter," he said after a moment. "You had no idea what you were getting into." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "Maybe. But it's too late now. The story's already out there. You can't stop it." Kane's smile was thin and dangerous. "We'll see about that." Before I could respond, there was a sound from outside, a loud crash, followed by the sound of running footsteps. Kane's head snapped toward the door, his grip on the gun tightening. "What the—" he started, but he didn't get a chance to finish. The door burst open, and Ms. Harper came charging in, a heavy metal pipe in her hands. She swung it at Kane with all her strength, catching him off guard. The pipe connected with his arm, and he let out a grunt of pain, the gun falling from his hand and skittering across the floor. "Run!" Ms. Harper shouted, swinging the pipe again. I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed Claire's arm and pulled her toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Behind us, I could hear the sound of the pipe clanging against something, and Kane's furious shouts, but I didn't look back. We burst out into the night, the cold air hitting me like a slap. Ms. Harper's car was still parked where we'd left it, and I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the door open. "Get in!" I shouted, shoving Claire into the back seat. Ms. Harper appeared a moment later, her face pale and her breathing ragged. She jumped into the driver's seat and started the engine, peeling out of the driveway with a screech of tires. I glanced out the window and saw Kane stumbling out of the cabin, clutching his arm. His face was twisted with rage, and for a moment our eyes met. The look in his eyes sent a chill down my spine, but then we were speeding down the dirt road, the cabin disappearing into the darkness behind us. No one spoke as we drove, the tension in the car almost unbearable. My mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. We'd escaped for now. But Kane wasn't going to let this go. He'd come after us again, and next time he might not be so careless. Finally, Ms. Harper broke the silence. We need to get to the police. We can't handle this on our own anymore. Claire nodded, her voice trembling. But what if they're in on it? What if Kane's got them in his pocket? Ms. Harper's jaw tightened. Then we go higher. State police, FBI. Someone has to listen. I leaned back in my seat, my mind spinning. It felt like we were running out of options, but we couldn't give up. Not now. Not after everything we'd been through. But as we drove through the dark, empty streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that Kane was always going to be one step ahead. The trap had been set, but the game was far from over. And the next move was his. The car sped through the night, the hum of the engine the only sound breaking the heavy silence. Ms. Harper's hands were tight on the wheel, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds. Claire sat beside me in the back seat, her arms wrapped around herself, staring blankly out the window. I could feel the weight of what had just happened pressing down on all of us, but there was no time to process it. Not yet. Where are we going? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Ms. Harper's eyes met mine in the mirror. The police station. It's the only place we'll be safe. Claire shifted in her seat, her voice shaky. But what if they're in on it? What if Kane's got them in his pocket? Ms. Harper's jaw tightened. Then we go higher. State police, FBI. Someone has to listen. I leaned back in my seat, my mind racing. The police station sounded like a good plan, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of options. Kane had found us at the county office, at Ms. Harper's office, at the safe house. He was always one step ahead. How long could we keep running before he caught up? The car turned onto the main road, the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. The town was quiet, the streets empty at this hour. It felt like we were the only people left in the world, driving through a ghost town. As we approached the police station, Ms. Harper slowed the car, her eyes scanning the building. "Stay here," she said, parking a few blocks away. "I'll go in and see if it's safe." I nodded, my heart pounding. Claire and I watched as Ms. Harper got out of the car and walked toward the station, her steps quick and purposeful. She disappeared inside, and the minutes dragged by, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, she reappeared, her expression grim. "It's clear," she said, getting back into the car. "But we need to be careful. We don't know who we can trust." We drove the rest of the way to the station and parked in the lot. The building was small and unassuming, with a flickering neon sign that read "Police" in bold letters. It didn't look like much, but it was the safest place we had. We got out of the car and hurried inside, the automatic doors sliding open with a soft whoosh. The lobby was empty except for a lone officer sitting behind the desk, his head bent over a stack of paperwork. He looked up as we entered, his expression bored. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice monotone. Ms. Harper stepped forward, her voice steady. "We need to speak to someone in charge. It's urgent." The officer raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. He picked up the phone and dialed a number, speaking in low tones. After a moment, he hung up and gestured toward a door. "Captain's in his office. Go on back." We followed his directions down a narrow hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The captain's office was at the end of the hall, the door slightly ajar. Ms. Harper knocked once, then pushed it open. The captain was a middle-aged man with a stern face and a no-nonsense demeanor. He looked up as we entered, his eyes narrowing. "What's this about?" Ms. Harper didn't waste any time. "We need your help. We're being pursued by a dangerous man named Victor Kane. He's connected to the HOA, and he's threatened our lives." The captain leaned back in his chair, his expression skeptical. "Victor Kane, huh? And what makes you think he's a threat?" Claire stepped forward, her voice trembling but determined. We have evidence. Proof of corruption, bribery, even threats of violence. But Kane's trying to stop us from exposing it. The captain's eyes flicked between us. His expression unreadable. And why should I believe you? Ms. Harper pulled out her phone and handed it to him. Look for yourself. The evidence is all there. But we need protection. Kane's already tried to kill us once tonight. The captain took the phone and scrolled through the files. His expression growing darker with each passing second. Finally he looked up, his face grim. This is serious. If what you're saying is true, we need to act fast. I felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived. The captain stood up, his voice sharp. Wait here. I'll make some calls. He left the room and we were alone again. The tension in the air was palpable, but for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, we were going to be okay. But then the door opened again and the captain stepped back in. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that made my stomach drop. I've made the calls, he said, his voice low. But there's a problem. What kind of problem? Ms. Harper asked, her voice tight. The captain hesitated, then sighed. Kane's already been here. He's got friends in high places, and they've made it clear that this case is off limits. Claire's eyes widened. What does that mean? It means, the captain said, his voice heavy, that I can't help you. Not officially. But I can give you a head start. Get out of town. Disappear. And don't come back. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. We were out of options. Out of time. But as we left the station, the weight of despair pressing down on us, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Not yet. The trap had been set. But now it seemed we were the ones caught in it. The cold night air hit us like a slap as we stepped out of the police station. The captain's words echoed in my mind, a grim reminder of just how deep Kane's influence ran. We were on our own, with no one to turn to and nowhere to hide. The weight of it all pressed down on me, but I couldn't let it crush me. Not yet. Ms. Harper was the first to break the silence. We need to get out of town. Now. Claire's voice was shaky. Where can we go? If Kane's got connections everywhere, how do we know we'll be safe? Ms. Harper's jaw tightened. We don't. But staying here is suicide. We'll figure it out as we go. I nodded, my mind racing. We couldn't just run aimlessly. We needed a plan. But with Kane always one step ahead, it felt like we were playing a game we couldn't win. We got back into the car, and Ms. Harper started the engine. Her hands steady on the wheel despite the tension in the air. We'll head for the state border, she said, pulling out of the parking lot. Once we're out of Kane's jurisdiction, we'll have a better chance. Claire leaned forward, her voice urgent. What about the evidence? If we can't get it to the right people, everything we've done is for nothing. Ms. Harper's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. We'll find a way. But first we need to survive. The drive was tense, the silence in the car almost unbearable. I stared out the window, the dark landscape rushing by in a blur. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but one kept rising to the surface. We couldn't keep running forever. At some point we'd have to face Kane. And when that time came, we'd need to be ready. After what felt like hours, we reached the state border. Ms. Harper pulled into a rest stop, the neon lights casting an eerie glow over the empty parking lot. We'll stop here for the night, she said, killing the engine. We need to rest, and we need to plan. We got out of the car, the cold night air biting at my skin. The rest stop was deserted, the only sound the faint hum of the vending machines inside. It wasn't much, but it was the safest place we had. We found a secluded corner and sat down, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on all of us. Ms. Harper pulled out her phone, her expression grim. I'll try to reach out to some contacts. See if anyone can help us. Claire leaned her head against the wall, her eyes closed. What if no one can? What if we're really on our own? I didn't have an answer. The truth was we might be. But I couldn't let myself believe that. Not yet. Ms. Harper's phone buzzed, and she looked down, her eyes